Hi there, I'm Yilmaz Erceyes, Chief Marketing Officer at Premier Foods, which is one of the main branded food businesses in the UK. It is also part of FTSE 250. I lead marketing, innovation, R&D, and consumer insights of the company. And it's my huge pleasure to welcome you to this series of Inspiring Leadership podcast with Jonathan Bowman-Perks. And I'm handing you over to Jonathan.
Thank you very much indeed, Yilmaz. It's great to have you on the series. You and I met through the Marketing Academy, which is a great organization working with lots of CMOs and people in the marketing sphere. And it's a real pleasure to have you on this series. And particularly as we've done some coaching together, you and I found quite a bond with you. We've shared many stories about health, well-being, food, nutrition. And I think it would be very interesting for people to hear your story. I think you have a fascinating story. And also we can talk about these various topics. So firstly, tell us a bit more about what you do in that crucial marketing function within such an important FTSE 250 company like Premier Foods.
Yes. As I've introduced, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer, Jonathan, and I have this position since 2019. So my remit is I'm responsible obviously for marketing, but the product development, innovation, R&D function, consumer insight is part of my remit. And what we do is we have the pleasure to own some of nation's favorite brands in the UK.
Yeah, give us a few, mention a few of them.
For example, our biggest brand is Mr. Kipling, which is a cake brand. Which we measure the scale and size of a brand with the household penetration, right? So it has about 55% household penetration in the UK, which means more than 1 in 2 homes in the UK at least buy 1 pack of Mr. Kipling a year. So it has a huge reach. And we have many of those brands, similar brands like Bisto, Oxo, Lloyd Grossman, Ambrosia. And when you look at our branded portfolio, we reach about 95% of UK households. So a massive reach. And it's a great company to work for. So I've joined Premier Foods about 7 years ago now.
Wow. Yeah.
As one of the leaders and leading one of the 5 main categories the company operates in. And in 2018, then I got promoted to become the marketing director for the UK business. And 2019, I've had my current role, which
fantastic. And you have a great, like we've discussed many times, have a great interest in leadership and developing to become the best leader you can be. But the man we see today as the leader you are, who shaped you and what life experiences do you have from a very early age? What were the people and what were the events that shaped you? Tell us a little bit about your sort of life story in perhaps about 5-10 minutes.
Definitely. I was born in Turkey, so I was born and raised in Turkey. I consider myself one of those people who had the lucky ticket for the ovarian lottery and born into really nice family. And my mother actually has been a huge influence on me. So she's been actually the main breadwinner. And when I was growing up, this is going back to 40 years, right? And the equity, diversity, inclusion wasn't a big thing, especially not at all in a developing country like Turkey. But my mother was the main breadwinner. She was working. She was a working mom. And when I reflect back on my life story, actually, she's instilled some of my values that I still hold today. So she's been a huge influence.
What was she doing, Yilmaz, in Turkey?
And she's just retired actually 3 years ago, but she's been was a medical professor. She was working at the last part of her career in one of the biggest university hospitals in Turkey, in the northeastern part of Turkey. And she was heading up the intensive care unit, and she was a doctor who was a professor. So she had a brilliant career. But also she taught me a lot about integrity and doing the right thing.
Yeah. And father, did father influence you in any particular way? What were his values that he instilled on you?
Yes, I mean, probably I'm a really interesting combination of both. And he was an entrepreneur. He worked at the probably until he was early 50s, and when I was born, he was already early 40s. So, and then with my mom's job, and we had to travel around the country, he wasn't working. But that entrepreneurial spirit and wearing his heart on his sleeve is probably coming a little bit influencing me in my profile as well.
Yeah, and so fascinating, the influence of mother, because I relate to that when we've talked, and you shared your life story with me some weeks ago. My mother was very influenced, obviously, because my father's a fast jet pilot, was killed when I was 2.5. He was killed flying. So she was the great influence on me, and my values are very influenced by a mother figure. And I think often people underestimate the power of a powerful female leader in whatever they do, whatever role they have, but the influence they have will last a lifetime. After that stage, how do we get to you being CMO at Premier Foods? What were a few of the key stepping stones and things that shaped you and you learned about leadership on the way?
Yeah. I think, as I said, I grew up in Turkey, studied my university in Turkey, and I've done a year of stint in the US. But probably my first step into professional life was with Procter Gamble. So I've done an internship. And interestingly, I always wanted to continue in the academia. I was never interested in industry per se. Because one of my other values are lifelong learning, and I'm coming from a family of teachers and academics, as I told about my mom, and it goes to my grandfather, my uncles. They're all in teaching. But I had an internship with Procter & Gamble because they were offering internships in Europe, in their technical center. I'd never been into Europe before. I've been into US. And they were actually paying really good salaries as well for their interns, which is not very usual. And I always had this dream of buying a Fender Stratocaster electric guitar, which was very pricey. I still remember it was more than $1,000, which was a huge sum for me. I said, you know what? I'll take this internship. I'll see a country I haven't seen. And also I'll make a bit more money than I can buy my electric guitar that I've been dreaming of for years. And then that's how I started. And when
did you buy the guitar? Did you buy the guitar?
Of course, absolutely.
I know you're still playing. You're still playing.
Yes, I still play a little bit. And that is one of we have a piano, an acoustic guitar, a couple of other, the electric drum. But that electric guitar is one that the kids are not allowed to touch yet. So I have a 9 and a 7 years old. So that's still cherished.
Well, that's really interesting. There's a lovely guy we had on, Larry English, who wrote a book, Office Optional. And in it, he's talked about the 1,200 people who work in his company, Centrix Consulting. And they come together about 2 or 3 times a year, bring their partners, fly into a place in America, and they also have a band. And the band comes together and plays on those events, but they never meet each other beforehand. I wonder if you could perhaps, for Premier Foods, set up a band and then it could play at one of your big events. How about that? With you on guitar or something? That's your challenge. Exactly. That's your challenge.
Indeed, it's a good one.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. And let's look at the highs and lows, because I mean, great experience, Procter & Gamble.
Yes.
And just like me getting into the British Army, it was a very difficult thing to get into. But once you were into it as an army officer, the training and development was superb. And I think it's the same at Procter & Gamble. Getting into Procter & Gamble, a lot of people want to, but very few get in. Yeah. What was, when you did it, what was the selection process like, and why did they choose you?
Yeah, and as I said, I went through the internship, and there is the Procter & Gamble, one of the streams is via internship programs. So I was selected for an internship program. I started in Belgium, and I had a 3-month summer internship on actually working in engineering function in one of their manufacturing plants. And I just loved it. I mean, it was exactly as you said, the focus of the company on people development, leadership development, and also overall, I mean, there is one of the values of the P&G is the interest of the individual and the company are inseparable.
Yeah.
Right? Which I thought it's very unusual.
Yes.
And one of the iconic CEOs of P&G many decades ago said, if you totally, completely take out everything the P&G owns and just leave the brands and the people, we will rebuild the entire company in 10 years.
Wow.
That's the type of motto and focus of the brands and the people that really resonated with me.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that, just like I've got General Lord Dana, who I'm really chuffed is going to be on one of the podcasts, and he was very influential to me. He was my commanding officer. I was one of the company commanders, and I've never forgotten what I learned from him years later, 20 years or more later. Did you take the good learning from Procter Gamble, and have you been using that in Premier Foods for the way you lead your own people? Is there any couple of things you want to say about your own style that you still use, which were good values you learned from P&G?
Exactly. And I think, I mean, the Premier Foods story is also a very interesting one, because the company hasn't been doing well for a very long time, especially. And when I joined, there was a really exciting vision on the company for some of the new leaders just joined the company, which is our current CEO, Alex Whitehouse, etc. And I met them. But the vision was turn around the company based on brand building and innovation and having the right people and creating the right culture. That focus of P&G or brands and people, I've seen actually, although the Premier Foods when I joined was nowhere near that, there was that exciting vision, right? And that really attracted me. And as I said, I joined as one of the directors. And as we started turning around the company, this is exactly being by focusing on the brand building, innovating, and also putting in place the right culture by evolving the existing organization, but also by bringing new blood into the company. And ever since, and now, I mean, we've successfully turned around. If you look at our stock price, if that's one of the measures of a success of a company, we've quadrupled it since the pre-COVID levels. So, and when you look, the focus that we have, and I have certainly with my team, is whatever happens, for example, on the people development, during COVID, when we were not sure about the uncertainty and investment required, obviously, we've made enormous amount of investment to make sure all our colleagues, especially manufacturing colleagues, are safe, right, to be able to keep operating. But those took a lot of investment. But on top, we continued our learning and development programs, our academies, right?
Yeah, so and I just want to bring up a point on that, Yilmaz. I'm really pleased you did that, because I was disappointed, and it would be unfair to name the companies, but there's a couple of sort of top branded FTSE companies and professional services, accounting and professional services firms where I was coaching in there. And when the pandemic started, they went, stop, whatever you're doing, coaching, development, stop right there. I said, but we just got a couple of sessions left. I'll do it for free. No, stop what you're doing. No more, bang. The door closed on development. And I just thought, this is so short term that at the moment of a crisis, they pulled the plug on developing their people. One of those people was really had been through a battering with a person that they'd, difficult circumstances they'd been in, put it that way, and needed this support. And they were not going to carry on with that. And I thought that's a really bad message. So the fact that Premier Foods did invest in people and their safety, I think is a great credit to you and to them. Let's go on to my next question, which is really linked to this. In your life, what have been the proudest moments or proudest moment and a most difficult dark moment professionally or personally? And what did you learn from each of those two imposters?
Exactly. I think it's a good question, Jonathan. And if I'm honest, reflecting on, especially what you've learned piece. Interestingly, obviously, I have many proud moments in my career, and it's always having to do with teams or people achieving some really big, exciting visions and goals. But if you ask me, when were the moments that I've learned the most? Interestingly, it turns out, actually, they are the more difficult moments, right? And I know if you look around, especially with the rise of entrepreneurism, there's a lot of talk about, you need to, failure is part of life. You need to dust yourself up and keep going. I think it's absolutely right. You shouldn't get stuck on failure. But I'd like to offer a different thought, because it's, at least for myself, yes, when I fail, I tend to not let that drag me down for long. But actually, the biggest learnings about myself, I recognize, has happened throughout those either failures, or I found myself in a place or an environment that didn't really suit me. And it really takes, yes, you need to dust yourself and move on. But I think you really need to explore, peel the layers of the onion, if you like, to really get to the nub of what's that key learning and how can I grow out of it. And usually I took two things, right? Either it becomes, look, I've discovered something about me that I want to work on and get to better self of me, or I've discovered something about me in conjunction with that environment I'm in, and I realize that's not the right environment for me, and I really need to pivot.
Yeah, and I think that's a very insightful comment you make about what is the right environment for you and what's the wrong environment for you. And when things work out, that you take personal ownership. It was you that did it. You can't blame it on someone else, on the environment. But what did you learn, and how can you improve yourself? And looking back again with the aspect of learning, to the younger Yilmaz, when you were just starting out, knowing what you know now at the age of 43, if you went back and met the 16-year-old version of you, or anybody who's quite young, what would you say are like the most important things from your perspective that worked for you, and the things that you just shouldn't worry about?
I think what I would say to myself, especially starting his career, is I would say really invest in broader relationships. I think it took me a while to learn the importance of broader relationship. And I mean, network is probably an overused word, but I tended to see, I was really a lot more results oriented and obsessed with efficiency. It was always, my mind would go on, if this is what I'm trying to achieve, what's the quickest, most efficient way that I can achieve with using less resources, even taking less of people's time, right? And that takes you down a path of certain relationship, and probably very focused relationship with your immediate team. However, I think if I was doing all over again, probably I would, from a relationship building point of view, broaden my horizon a lot more. Probably that's one top tip I would keep. And then the things that, another thing I would say is, in life, there is never a straight line from A to B, right? And everyone has their own paths and different ways. So I don't think I've ever been obsessed about going to A to B is the fastest time, etc. So I always had that sense of calmness, but I think probably that's another thing.
Yeah, so I think it's really good, and that getting from A to B in the way that works for you. And I still remember Colin Powell's book, and I think he called it "It Worked for Me," and that just because it works for you doesn't mean it works for someone else. And that there's that old Christian saying, which is that treat your neighbor as yourself. Well, actually, no, treat your neighbor as your neighbor wants to be treated, and not as you'd like to be treated. You've got to find out what works for them. Let's go around the Inspiring Leadership Compass with the 8 components. And And just hear what your tips are in each of those areas. That the first one, which is true north at the very top of the compass in the inspiring leadership model that we use and is used in people's psychometrics, is moral quotient. So your integrity, your values, your principles. Mm-hmm. With a strong mother like you had, who really was a role model and a trendsetter and breaking the mold, what would you say are your top three principles and values that you still live by that were perhaps shaped from those days?
Yeah, I think I have three core values that I live with, not even try, but it's integral part of me, right? And one is ownership, one is continuous learning, and the third one is the integrity, really doing the right thing for the thing about the broader good versus narrow interest. And as you highlighted, that integrity was instilled in me observing my mother, because she was unusual in many ways. One is obviously she was the working mother, main breadwinner. She had a successful career in academia, but also she had an unusual set of beliefs that might not have been very popular in Turkey. Obviously, Turkey is a secular country, but over the years, especially the last maybe 2 decades, the importance of religious belief has increased, and the impact of it in many parts of life and even in the professional life of individuals has increased. But my mother is a vocal atheist, which is very unusual. And she was working in a universal hospital, which is a government body, right? There's some of the attainments are done by government. And obviously you can imagine the mismatch of those two things, belief and the political environment, the political context. But the thing is, she was very well respected, highly respected by her colleagues from all walks of life. You know, they would embrace her. And when I asked, like, how come does that happen in a context like that? And it comes down to, because she had very strong North Stars of hers, which was treating the patients, doing the best possible service, right? And also educating and preparing the next generation of doctors. So she was really, all her actions was guided by how can she do the best for those two things? How can she serve people who are ill, and how can she build the next generation of doctors?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so that was the integrity, doing it the right thing, best possible service, educating others, being an atheist rather than, as was expected, to be a Muslim like everybody else in her faith, and that she was the main breadwinner. And then you also mentioned ownership and continuous learning. Continuous learning is something you and I have talked a lot about, but ownership is very interesting. Jeff Nischwitz, another friend of mine who's been on the podcast, he talked about, he was disappointed to see a CEO who was being called out for some emails which had been, I think, stolen from her, in which she was horrible to a member of her staff. And she said, that wasn't me. You know, I'm sorry and I apologize, but that wasn't me. Well, that's not taking ownership. You know, it was her. She wrote them. That was her. Okay, it wasn't exactly how she'd like to be remembered and seen, but that was her. And so I wonder what ownership means to you, and whether that story has any resonance for you about how you don't want to be as opposed to how you do want to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's interesting. We talked about how some adverse situations helped me understand myself at my biggest learnings. And it's interesting that ownership crystallized in my mind as one of my values maybe about 3-4 years ago. And and I was reflecting on my career, because as you said, I mean, so far I've worked on only 2 companies, about 13-14 years in P&G, Procter Gamble, and Premier Foods. And they are very different companies from a scale, complexity. And in P&G, when I reflect on my career, there were times when I was on my A game, right? I was literally on my A game. I mean, I had a really good career. I was good, rated all the time, but there were times that I was on my A game. There were times where I was good, but I knew that I wasn't giving my best, and I could. And when I tried to decode those two things, interestingly, it turns out when I was on my A game, I was in teams and groups or businesses with very high growth, less matrix, very entrepreneur, very agile, right? For example, my home care, what is called home care, and if you look at my career, I had the fortune of introducing some of the brands in new categories, like, for example, Febreze.
I love Febreze.
Exactly. I mean, it's a brilliant brand, wonderful product, with superior product. At the heart of it lies a really technological advantage that delights consumers. And my first brand manager job was take that lovely brand in Europe from being just fabric spray, a very limited use, and make it an air freshener brand, which was a category more than the size of $1 billion in Europe. Right?
It's in my room now. I'm one of your I'm one of those users.
Exactly. And when I reflect on that, it was a exciting vision, very bold vision against some very tough competitive benchmark. But my job was lead the team to establish Febreze in the air fresheners category. And interestingly, I moved the business from 50 million pounds revenue to almost $500 million revenue in 3.5 years. And the experience, the excitement during that time, that feeling of ownership, not having that matrix organization at the back to deal with, it really drove out my best performance.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point. Too many of the big organizations I've worked with, some of the big banks and others, have very matrixed organization. And I come from the British Army, where there is one commander. I'm in command. And when that person's injured or killed, the next person goes, I have command, and they take over. And everybody knows that they have ownership for the success or for the failure. And they don't look for somebody else to blame. They accept responsibility. So I love that point. Let's go from that from MQ onto PQ, the second of the one, which is about why you do what you do, your dharma, your vocation, your calling. What gives your life meaning and purpose? What comes up in tips about this?
Yeah, I think, you wouldn't be surprised when I describe you what really drives me, that big vision, big goal to go after. And therefore, really, if I reflect, condense my purpose, what really drives me is really inspiring, enriching growth stories, right? In people's, in businesses, in teams that are really worth telling your grandchildren about. When you get to that 80 years of age, if we all have the fortune to get there, when you reflect back, a lot of the detail really fizzles out, and some really meaningful big growth stories are left.
Yeah.
Either growing people, growing businesses. When you're doing, I've talked about the Febreze, right? It was 15 years ago. I was leading a small team of 4, and we're still in touch with them, right? We have a WhatsApp group. It is because that time was magical, that explosive growth. We have many experiences of that now. We're building in Premier Foods, going into new categories and achieving really disproportionate growth. And that's the growth is really drives me, and the growth in people, growth in businesses. And that's really my main purpose, and that's what motivates me.
Yeah, and I love that story. And I've just been back to a reunion of my cadets at Sandhurst, who I was an instructor to them 31 years ago. And we went to Old College, and it was a lovely dinner. We were all there in black tie. It was really special to see what people have done with their lives and where they've gone. And everybody has a story to tell, and everybody has something. And I look back at some of the proudest moments, and they're when I've been part of something which is really successful and about growth and development of people, like developing leaders of the future. Thank you for that. Now on to another topic, which is a favorite for you and I, health quotient, HQ. You introduced me to, I'm wearing this this ring, this Aura ring. You introduced me to that, and you've been using one for 3 years. Tell us about the Aura ring and how you've used it to have that calmness and balance and include fitness in your life.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, the Oura Ring, probably the quickest way to summarize, it's a Fitbit. It's not a watch, because I love wearing my other watch, which is another meaning for me, which we got with my wife when we got engaged, etc. So we have each other's name on it. So it's not a watch, but a ring. You know, that's the thing. And the reason, I mean, health, as you and I talk endlessly, right? And it's interesting. The more I said I do a lot of reflection about the adverse moments, and I try to understand, why did I find myself in those situations, right? And many times I realized is when I didn't have that inner calmness, and I really I react from that stimulus to reaction. There was a very sudden reaction. And that's the thing I started to realize. And I said, okay, how can I get myself, whatever is happening around, how can I get myself to that inner calmness, that I can be fully present and I can choose how I react to any situation. It could be having a conversation with an individual, in a business situation. And it really came down to when my health is, when my energy is at the right level and I'm fully present in a moment, that's when I'm at my best self as a leader. And that's why I'm able to serve much better to my teams. And that's how I got into that journey of Oura Ring and really try to analyze what drives that.
Yeah, that's really good. And of course, you're by all that, your energy and your calmness, managing your emotions, because we can't control them, we have to better manage them. It's also, it links beautifully the mental and the physical health and well-being. They're all intertwined. So have you found during the pandemic that you're able to look after your own mental health and also look after the mental health of the people that you lead in your department within Premier Foods?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, right? And not everyone experiences this pandemic in the same way. Now, I consider myself as one of the lucky ones because I have a family, I have 3 kids, and one of the positive sides of this has been, rather than spend 2 hours a day on commute, I could spend that time on my exercise and also some extra time with my family. However, as I said, the pandemic hasn't been experienced the same by many people. And that's where we put a lot of effort and attention on constant communication, trying to think about the well-being of our colleagues. Obviously, everybody was working from home, but for some individuals who wasn't able to do, we've created the right environment in the office with the proper social distancing, isolation, etc., that they could still have a very well-balanced life. But as you said, that interaction of physical and mental well-being is enormous. And I've really realized that more and more over the past couple of years, as I said, as I've been reflecting on what are the times that I haven't been by my best self. And it always comes down to, you know what, maybe I haven't looked after my physical well-being. So since the pandemic now, I'm exercising at least 5 times a week, every morning. My sleep is, I'm pretty religious about it, at least 7 hours, most of the days 8 hours of sleep. And all that things has been a big change. It actually helped me during pandemic. I was able to do even more than pre.
I think it's very interesting. In my own battle with occasional mental health challenges, I know that I got myself out of the biggest dip ever through health, fitness, and well-being, just like you've done. And I'm going to stick with it now because I know it leads to good mental health as well as good physical health. Thank you for that. Let's go on from health to EQ, emotional and social intelligence. I found you very easy to build rapport. And when our mutual friend Catherine Tulper put the two of us together. She matched the two of us. She thought we'd be a good team. Me as your coach and you as the senior executive with a lot of great potential. She knew we'd just get on well because you have good emotional and social intelligence. What would be a tip that you've learned over the years you pass on to others that you've picked up on the way and you found it served you well authentically for how you get on with other people?
Yeah, I think probably me living in very different cultures and very different environments really helped, right? So as I said, I was born in Turkey and grew up there, lived about a year in the US, 2.5 years in Belgium, about 6 years in Switzerland, and now I've been in the UK for more than 10 years. So it really experiencing different cultures and how what are those norms helps you broaden your horizon. That's why I'm also very passionate about diversity and inclusion. And if you look at Premier Foods, it's a very different company now than it was 7 years ago when I joined. Probably when I joined, there will be non-British colleagues would be less than the number of two hands. You see what I mean? So I think having exposed to different cultures and different styles helped me. But one of the things which I'm by no means mastered at it, but you and I, we share again passion about Nancy Klein's book about listening, the thinking, and that I've seen had really helped me. It was an eye opener. That book about promise I want, the promise that changes everything, which is all about the way you listen, how it really triggers the thinking on the other person. So I was always approaching that I only listen to understand what they say. But whenever I sometimes phrase, there are moments that you need to listen to really ignite the thinking of the individual, because it helps when people talk, it helps their thinking. It's really completely step change of how I approach my interactions in certain situations with people.
It's really good, and I've seen it in you as you've read it and you applied it even in our interactions. So thank you for that. It makes a difference in our interaction. I know it will with others. So that sense of listening to ignite rather than listening to respond, or to reload, as we used to describe it in IBM. People didn't listen to ignite or respond; they listened to reload, get their point back in there. From EQ, there's the next one around the compass is cultural intelligence, CQ, which is about diversity, equality, inclusion. Some of the things you've very much talked about, because the two are quite inextricably linked. And to have a collective intelligence where people bring in the best from the diverse people who are there. What would be a tip that you'd give about cultural intelligence?
I think, as I said, I'm a marketeer, right? And as a company, we are responsible for brands that serve 95% of the population in the UK. And when you look, we are serving actually a very diverse group of individuals, diverse communities. And if we are to do a brilliant job at that, I think we really need to have that diverse thinking. And that's why I'm really passionate, and it won't come you as a surprise that I'm super passionate about gender equity, equality for working moms. And we spend a lot of thinking and time on how we can create opportunities that people can have, that even if they're the main breadwinner and looking after children, and they could also have a very fulfilling, successful careers, right? That's ingrained in, because that's how I am here. Yes. That's, having that mother is brought me here. Therefore, I want to pay it forward. But obviously, equality, inclusion, diversity has many other facets. But there are I'm really passionate about that, because we're serving diverse group of consumers, individuals, and we need to have that diversity of thought to be able to do that most effectively.
Yeah, and that leads so pertinent, leads us on nicely to the next one, which is resilience quotient. And people who are diverse and different from others have to be very resilient, because there's quite a kickback. What have you learned about resilience against adversity, and a tip you'd give to other people listening?
Yeah, I think I mean, if I could help in one thing in your listeners and people to see that adversity in a different way. Obviously, there are some really dramatic things happening in everybody's lives, but as I said, in my case, when I reflect back, really digging deep and trying to decode that adversity. Why did I feel that way? What does it teach me? And therefore, I usually take, this is the thing that I need to work on. For example, that listening, I'm really passionate about it, because I've had a lot of feedback as I was growing up as a leader, that when I was interacting with my team, they didn't feel listened. But it was really curious to me. I said, look, I'm pretty sure I can tell you word for word what exactly you said to me in that situation. How can I not be listening if I'm really hearing you and understanding you? But then I understood, actually, you know what? It is not whether I really heard the word that was coming out. It is truly listen to even help them evolve their own thinking through talking, right? Because that's the thing, and that's why I really started to get passionate about, and I think you introduced me to Nancy in her book, it was a big light bulb moment for me. And it comes from some of those feedbacks that you get, some of the situations you find yourself in, and you say, you know what, I wasn't my best self in that. And you don't really understand, because all you hear is like, you're not listening. But you think, look, I'm listening. I can tell you exactly what you said, but that's not the point. So sometimes it's not even listening. Listening to respond is a sin. Listening to understand is also, it's okay, but doesn't unlock every situation. I think the next level is listening to ignite the thinking of the others is the bet.
Yeah.
That through that adversity.
Yes, and actually, there's 5 levels of listening in some of the models, where you listen to yourself, because there's a story going on in your head and how you want to come across and what's going on for you. So listening to yourself, listening to the content of what the other person's saying, listening to the context of what they're saying, listening to the unsaid, what is not said, what's missing, what's between the lines, and then finally listening for meaning. And then the other thing that triggered in me in what you just said is a lovely quote from one CEO some years ago, which I've never forgotten. He said, people forget what you say, they forget what you do, but they never forget how you make them feel. Yeah. And so if they didn't feel that you listened to them and you saw them and you understood them and their point of view, then you've lost it. You've absolutely lost it. So I even now try and think about a meeting I'm going in, at the end of it, how do I want them to feel at the end of this meeting? Not what's the outcome I want, the negotiation I've won, but how do I want them to feel? Because if they feel embittered and very angry, that's a short-term tactical win. It's not a long-term strategic relationship. Quick fire questions now in the final few minutes. Brand, which is such a big thing for you, brand reputation, image, and impact. What would be your top tip to people about personal brand? And then also you're an expert on organizations brand. What would be your tip on those two?
I think one of the things with branding is it takes a lot longer to establish. You need to really be clear about what you want to stand for, if even as a person or an organization, or it might even be a single brand product, and you really need to crystallize, here's what I want to stand for. And you really need to work on it week in, week out, year in, year out, decade in, decade out. It takes a very long time to build a brand, right? So probably this is the thing. And sometimes people underestimate the amount of repetition, the time, the consistency you need to build a brand. I think that longevity and consistency is probably the biggest tip that I would give once you crystallize what you want to stand for.
I love that one. Great. Thank you. Legacy, the last one of the 8 components of the compass before we go on to executive teams and a book and then your top tip. What would you like your legacy to be in your work and in your life?
I think my legacy would be linked to my purpose. I would love to, when I start working, I would love to be able to point to a few inspiring, enriching growth stories in teams and people and in businesses.
Yeah.
And I'd love to be able to have collected many of those throughout my career and still be in touch with those people as I still am. So that would be a brilliant legacy. And even from a personal point of view, I'm a father of 3, that when I engage with my kids, that creating those moments of growth where they either discover, because they are 9, 7, and just over a year old. So they're still in that wonderful period where everything is new, everything is exciting, and everything is a learning opportunity, a discovery and growth opportunity. And even when I approach my time with them, it's always when we are creating those growth moments, growth stories is the one that we all enjoy the most. And I want to be able to create many more of those stories over the years.
It's lovely. And you talk about your 1-year-old. Lee and I are now grandparents, and our son has a 1-year-old and another one due on the way. So we're enjoying the moment when they all come, and we've got a room full of various bits and pieces for children. It's amazing the amount of stuff you need with a small baby or a small toddler, and certainly to travel. So I really relate to that. From legacy to executive teams, and you've been with many high-performing executive teams and ones where you felt a real sense of being on your A game, as you described it quite rightly. To get to a time when you're on your A game, you also have to turn around a poor performing and quite toxic team. Often it might be just affected by one person, one man, one woman. Mm-hmm. What's your advice about turning around a toxic team to make a high performing team?
I think it's interesting. Our current executive team. I mean, it's a brilliant team. We really work together really well, and I feel we have common values and common interests. Right, some of the things that we share, and it wasn't obvious at the beginning because the current executive team has been formed in 2019 with few people from the previous exec team, and 3 of us have joined as the new executive team under leadership of the new CEO, Alex Whitehouse. But one of the things that he's done is we really invested in that relationship of that team and establishing some ground rules, right? And for me, it really starts with the leader of that team. In our case was Alex, our CEO. And he was upfront with his non-negotiables, and there weren't a huge list, but there were a few, right? And one of them was, look, we operate as one team. When we get together and talk about the business, always the interest of the entire business is on the back of our minds. And it really bang on with my integrity value, doing the right thing for the greater good rather than your narrow interests. But I found myself really at home, breath of fresh air. But I think that period that we invested, getting together, understanding each other personally, what drives us, what motivates us, what's our profile, what are our triggers, really understanding that helped us enormously. And to be honest, we were really surprised how quickly we gelled. And our conversation is all about how do we further the interest of the business or our people. That's it. There's no other agenda.
That's a brilliant story on how to sort of build up a high-performing team. And as an adjunct to that, if you do have someone who's toxic in your team, what have you done about that?
I think I have a fundamental belief, Jonathan. I've never come across ill-intended people in my career. You might call me, I'm lucky. Now, have I not came across people who didn't quite fit in a team, or, as you said, created a toxic environment? Yes, I have. But when you dig down, even in my teams that I was leading, when you dig down, I think it all comes down to, if it's not some small things that they were pissed off and you talking make it good, but if it's really structural thing that's persisting, in my experience, it all came down to the mismatch of that individual of the environment. And once you decode that and help them see it, and I've seen many people who've been labeled as toxic in one team, one environment, they go off onto a completely different culture, completely different setting, and they get onto their A game. They become highly respected, very high performing, very valued. And that's why now I believe it's really that's an issue or a mismatch. That individual finds himself or herself in a situation where it doesn't play to their strength. And maybe they haven't been able to see that through. And my role as a leader has always been, how do you understand that? How do you coach them, guide them to see it? Right?
Yeah.
And I've had many examples there. I had marketers. I mean, the marketing roles in Premier Foods is really general management roles, end to end. It's not specialist comms. There are young leaders would come in. They might have a passion on, let's say, communications part of marketing, and they find themselves in an environment, in a job that 15% of what you do is that. Obviously, you're not going to be happy, right? And obviously, you're not going to be happy, and it's going to reflect. It's going to be thought as toxic. And how do you find that? Open that individual mind up, and then guide them through a place where they can add value and be valued, and that toxicity suddenly disappears.
That's beautifully put, and it's quite a different take on what others have said, and I like it. And it does fit with really understanding people, what drives and motivates them. And as you say, it's the round peg in the round hole. Is it the right fit? And if it's not, let's find somewhere where you're happy.
Yeah.
And if you've got a big enough organization, you can move people around, not to get rid of a problem, but find somewhere where they can add real value. It's really good. Last few minutes, let's hear you've got 3 books that you particularly like. Would you mention your 3 books and the authors? And then we'll go on to your top tips. So your 3 books. Absolutely.
I think we talked about Nancy Klein, which I'm really jealous. She's a good friend of yours, and I think she's phenomenal. She has a phenomenal story. And the book that she wrote called The Promise That Would Change Everything. And the promise is, I won't interrupt you, has been a really a huge influence on me recently. So that's one. I think the second one around leadership is the ex-US Navy captain who was the captain of a nuclear submarine. And he tells his story about how he got assigned to a submarine, which was at the bottom of the pecking order from a capability and results point of view. And he completely turned it around and made it the top. And the magical thing is, he didn't change any of the sailors on that ship, right? So that the book called Turn the Ship Around. And that was because usually when you talk about leadership and high-performing organization, one of the things people say is, yeah, you need to come into a group within the 6 months, you need to make up your mind who stays, who goes. There might be some truth in that, but I found that book magical in the sense that he didn't change a single sailor on that ship, whereas they take it from at the bottom of the rank to the top, which that book tells that story, which I found fascinating. and some of the leadership principles and techniques. And the last one, which is a bit of a heavy read actually, on neuroscience. It's Daniel Kahneman's book. He had the Nobel Prize on economics, but it is the book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And there has been a lot of learning and understanding on how people think, make decisions about that cognitive science. And it's actually, as marketeers, some of those we knew all along, right? But we didn't know why it was working. And now there is a lot more science behind it. And that book I find fascinating, about how people think. And in life, 95% of the decisions we make are emotional rather than rational, right? And when you go through, and it's a really fascinating book that I recommend everyone, but it's a bit of a heavy read.
And I've enjoyed all three books, so I really support that. And also, if you look back on my website, you'll see that Captain David Marquet was one of the guests, and he spoke on the podcast. So have a listen to his book. Very, very good. Turn the Ship Around and Leadership as Language is his other book, which I love. I'm hoping to get Nancy Klein to come on the podcast, but Nancy's very humble and often avoids the limelight, but I'll work on asking her. One day, maybe she'll come. Finally, your 2-minute top tip on what bit of advice you would give to other people. So if you just introduce yourself again once more, Yilmaz, and give us your 2-minute leadership top tip.
Yes. Hi again. I'm Yilmaz Erceyes. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Premier Foods. So my 2-minute leadership top tip will be about how, as leaders, probably we should manage our energy rather than time. And actually, leadership is very time inefficient, right? When you think about, because it involves people, it involves understanding people. But my first tip will really focus on managing your energy rather than your time. And that's what I found helps me be my best self when I'm leading my teams and the organization. And the second one with that is when interacting with people, being fully present, because it's very easy to get distracted in current modern life. You know, many of us have 2 mobiles, personal, work. There's a lot of things fighting for our attention. But I think that being fully present in a moment with the teams, also in your life, is when the real magic happens, and when your effectiveness of leadership has improved. So those will be my top tips.
Yilmaz, thank you very much indeed. It's been a great honor having you on, and congratulations in your role in marketing at Premier Foods. I wish you every success there, and thank you for what you've shared.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.